So as you've noticed, the symbolizations have been getting more difficult. I want to talk about a more systematic approach to doing symbolization problems, looking for main connectives and what I call the removal test for finding main connectives. So let's remember, what is a main connective. So when you form a complex sentence, what happens? Well, you take some things that are already sentences and you take a piece of logical vocabulary, a logical operator, and you bang them all together, following in the ways that the grammatical rules say that you can. Okay, good. So that logical operator that you add, that's the main connective. And the sentence's main connective determines what kind of sentence it is. So it's a conditional or a negation or a conjunction or whatever. What makes the sentence a conjunction? Its main connective is a conjunction. Its main connective is a conditional, and that makes it a conditional sentence. So one piece of terminology that's helpful when talking about these things is the word scope. So we say that one connective has scope over another connective when the first connective is higher in the tree, in the sentences tree, than the second connective. So for example, here's this sentence. Okay, so this connective, this arrow, that occurs in the tree above the other arrow and the negation, and so that arrow has scope over those two other connectives. So that's when we talk about scope, that's what we mean. We mean how high is it in the tree, and one thing has scope over another if the first one is higher in the tree than the second one, if it's above it, well, actually not higher, if it's above it in the tree. Okay, so how do we symbolize using trees? Well, you've already been doing that, but to be explicit about what's happening is at each step, what happens is you find the sentence's main connective and the things that were added to the main connective to make the whole thing. And then you symbolize the main connective, you turn it into a logical symbol, and its immediate parts, the things that we added to the main connective to make the whole sentence, those go into the text boxes. But the main connective is not copied down into the text boxes because it's being symbolized. And then we just repeat this on the constituents in the text boxes until we get all the way down to the bottom, and we're at atomic sentence letters. We're at atomic English sentences, which turn into sentence letters. So that's how I want to do this. What does this add so far? The idea of just what I'm doing, it helps us to reflect on what we're doing and have a clear understanding of what we're doing. At each step, we're looking for the main connective and symbolizing it. Remember that maybe squirrels and cats and various animals can reason logically, but they can't reflect on their reasoning. We can. This is an example of doing that and having a more explicit understanding of what we're doing. We're finding the main connective and symbolizing it. Now, with that in mind, we can also ask then, okay, how do I find the main connective? And there's a removal test, which is this. So, or why does it work? So, if an if-then or an if or whatever in a sentence is the main connective, then that if-then was added to two other sentences to form the sentence we're looking at. That means if we take the if-then away, if we remove it, what should we left with? Exactly two sentences, no more and no less. If we remove a piece of vocabulary and we're not left, if we remove an if and we're not left with exactly two sentences, then that if is not the main connective. So that's a way to test for main connectives. And if the not or variant, like it's not the case that is the main connective, then, well, how does that work? We add the not to one sentence, so when we take the not away, if we're left with exactly one sentence, then the not is the main connective. So that's the way in which main connectives work. And the way in which we can find them is by asking what happens when I remove it. And I'm going to demonstrate this technique on some problems, on some symbolization problems. Okay, so I'm going to give us some just straightforward examples of how we would use this removal test, and just to make sure we get the sense of how it works. So here we have, if Alfred will pass if he concentrates, then logic is enjoyable. So we have an if here, an if here, and a then there. Okay, well, so how are we going to approach this? Well, you might think, oh, maybe that if is the main connective. After all, sometimes if comes in the middle of the sentence. We say, I'll be happy if I have a cookie, and that's a sentence of English, and the if is in the middle. So maybe that's what's happening here. Maybe this if is the main connective. Well, so what we want to do is test and see, okay, if that if is the main connective, then it should be that with it goes between two sentences. There should be exactly two sentences left when we remove it, one on each side. So what happens if we get rid of this? Well, what do we have? Here we have if Alfred will pass. Is that a sentence? No. And here we have he concentrates and logic is enjoyable. Is that a sentence? No. So when we remove the if, are we left with exactly two sentences? No, we're not left with any sentences. And that tells us that this if in the middle is not the main connective. And that means that this if is the main connective. Now, how far does it reach? Does the antecedent just go to Alfred will pass, or does it go all the way to he concentrates? It goes all the way to he concentrates because that's where the comma is. But the point is, if you want to know why is it that if is the main connective, not that if, it's because of the removal test. The removal test tells us if that's the main connective, then this should be a sentence and this should be a sentence, but neither of them are, and so that if is not the main connective. And that's why we know, that's how we know it's not the main connective. We take it out, we're not left with the right stuff. So let's just look at one more application of this. Only if Alfred concentrates will he pass, provided that the lectures are exciting. So let's look at the provided that. And if we remove the provided that, we have the lectures are exciting. That's a sentence. And only if Alfred concentrates will he pass. That's a sentence too. The only if has been moved around, but that's a sentence. So the provided that, when we remove it, are we left with exactly two sentences? Indeed we are. So the provided that passes the removal test, and that means it could be the main connective of this sentence. Now if the English sentence were ambiguous, then multiple pieces of logical vocabulary would pass the removal test, meaning that any of them could be the main connective. That's what would make the sentence ambiguous. Which piece of logical vocabulary is the main connective? Nothing about the sentence tells us. But this sentence is not ambiguous, provided that passed the test, and so we know that it's the main connective. If we weren't sure, we could ask what happens if we remove the only if. And we would have, well, we should be left with two sentences. Alfred concentrates, that's a sentence. Will he pass provided that the lectures are exciting? That's not a sentence. He will pass provided that the lectures are exciting. That's a sentence. But that's not what we have. We have will he pass, and that's not a sentence. Alfred concentrates, he will pass. That's not a sentence. Alfred concentrates, he will provided that, or provided that. That's not a sentence. There's no way to chop this thing up where we end up with exactly two sentences. And so the only if does not pass the removal test. When we remove it, are we left with exactly two sentences? No, we're not, so it's not the main connective. Provided that did pass the test, it is the main connective. So those are just some illustrations of how we can use it. And it helps actually most in bigger sentences where there are a whole bunch of possible candidates for the main connective, and it's a way of telling which one is the main connective of the whole sentence, and then moving with parts down through the rest of the sentence. So if you have questions about that, please let me know. Good luck symbolizing.